All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us this month. My name is Mike Shelah. I am the Director of Marketing and Development for Advantage Industries based in Columbia, Maryland. And we love this partnership with Dell. The last couple of months, we have been focusing on various aspects of cybersecurity. We had one expert on to talk about penetration testing. And then we had another expert on to talk about the differences between NIST 800-171 and CMMC. And this month, I thought it would be a really great idea to get a little more strategic with our conversations today. And so we've brought in Ankur Patel with Dell, one of their super smart people, one of their subject matter experts. And today we're going to discuss cloud strategy. Everybody uses the cloud, whether they like it or not. Because of that, there's a lot of myths, there's a lot of misconceptions, there's a lot of false information. Ankur and I are going to try and cut through that today and give you some clarity and give you some real strategic thoughts to implement to your company when it comes to how should the cloud impact my business in a positive way, and how do we avoid the cloud impacting my business in a negative way. So with that, Ankur, thank you so much for joining us on this presentation today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so you've put together a pretty cool presentation. I always get to see it ahead of time just to make sure that we're on point and we're in alignment. And yeah, you've got a great conversation piece for us today around what goes into the cloud and some cool things that you guys are doing at Dell. Mm-hmm. To talk about some hypotheticals with us that you guys are bridging right now, which I'm also looking forward to. So, feel free to kick off.
All right, cool. Thanks. And before I start, we got a bunch of people here. I'd like to hear your definition of the cloud, right? There's probably 10 people that will come on the presentation at any point, and there'll probably be 10 different definitions. So I'm curious on what you think the cloud means.
So my joke about that, and if you're on social media at all, you've seen this T-shirt. It says, "There is no cloud. It's just somebody else's computer." And that really is an oversimplification of what the cloud is, but it's very true. And you and I were talking about this before we began. Netflix is a cloud infrastructure. Everything that they are running is sitting on multiple servers around the world so that they can provide entertainment to millions and millions of people on the planet Earth. And Amazon is a cloud-based company. They have warehouses, but there's a ton of cloud infrastructure that goes into them, multiple server environments and redundant server environments. So the cloud to me is how the world functions. That's the easiest way to put it.
Yeah, no, it's a great definition, right? That is one definition. And I'll probably hear a bunch of different ones depending on who I ask. But, my goal in this session today, as you mentioned, right, is to determine how to use the cloud and, which cloud to use and why, right? Your ears will start bleeding at the end of this when I keep saying the word data first, right? But that is our stance at Dell, is that your decision on going to the cloud or which cloud to choose is really based on data, not on some commercial you saw on TV that says, just go there, it'll make life easy. So, if we look at, what's been causing customers to adopt the cloud, and, as you mentioned, in one sense, everyone is a technology company, right? If I'm an auto company, right, I've got sensors in all my cars that are sending data back to headquarters and they're analyzing it, right? They are a tech company. Retailers, right? They all have apps now. So they are a tech company. Grocery stores have delivery. You've got your Uber Eats type things. And, COVID, fortunately or unfortunately, has kind of made this transformation go a lot quicker, right?
Accelerated it, absolutely.
People had to transition or transform the way they work because people physically aren't in stores anymore. People have had to go digital. So even before that, right? Here's some examples, right? Uber, right? They don't have any vehicles, but they completely transformed the rideshare or taxi business. Facebook, they don't have content. They don't own content. It's people that put the content there. They transform media. Alibaba doesn't have any inventory, yet they're a huge, Amazon-like company. Same with Airbnb. They're completely digital. They don't own real estate, yet they're taking out hotels left and right, right? So people are adopting this whole digital transformation. And if you look at, the challenges in this space now, right? If we look at just shrinking market opportunities, so existing customers, you can take a retailer, right? The amount of opportunities or business verticals that they have is shrinking, right? So they're trying to branch out to different places to generate revenue, right? You've got competition in all these areas, especially now with in a digital world. It's easy for someone to just pop up a store and start going at it, right? Time to market is becoming super critical now, especially in this more competitive world. Whoever gets out first, right? They will probably win when it comes to coming out with different products. And then finally, it's how do I predict all of this, right? Things are happening so fast. How do directors and CIOs figure out which route to go? How quickly do I get there, right? It's becoming a big challenge. So all of this is putting huge pressures on IT, right? If you look at, again, a CIO, they feel they need to innovate IT a lot faster, right? They need to stay competitive, as we mentioned before the call. They're asking to do more with less in terms of cost, right?
Yeah.
And also they need to stay out of shadow IT because it's so easy for someone to just go to a public cloud and swipe a credit card, right? CIOs have no idea where any of their data is, right?
Yeah.
So that's that level. If you look at directors, right, the directors of IT, they're dealing with exploding data, right? All this digital transformation is causing more and more data to exist. So with exploding data comes higher costs, right? With more of that, they're putting more demand on their admins, right, to spin up this infrastructure, deliver these services. And then you've got the developers on the other side who are saying, hey, I need this infrastructure now, right? I can't wait for the typical, 6-week deployment cycle because, they're trying to spit out their apps as fast as they can to satisfy the higher ups, right? And now if we look at the admin, so the folks at the bottom that are doing all the actual work, right? They're asking, as I mentioned, they're being told, to support these larger and larger environments, typically with less and less people, right? You've probably seen this in your world, right? You generally don't have one team that just does servers, one team that just does storage, one team that just does networking. Usually that person is wearing multiple caps, right? So they're having to do more with less, the whole ticketing process, manual provisioning of servers, of storage, of networking. All of this is basically taking up all their time, and they have no time to actually do or architect projects that will actually bring in revenue to the company, right? So these are the challenges, at least within Dell, that I hear from all these different levels, and that's just day to day, right? If we talk about refresh, so great, I've got all these IT assets sitting on the floor. 3 years, 5 years from now, I have to go and refresh that environment. So now I got to go and think of all these things you see here on the screen. So application growth, right? I've got these developers, throwing all these different applications at me. How am I supposed to predict, what that's going to look like, right? I don't want to underbuy, right? Because someone's going to get mad, and budgets aren't infinite, right? So you don't want to underbuy, but on the other side, you also don't want to overbuy. Right. And we've got to maintain software compatibility. That's a big one, right? If I've got an environment, a legacy application, and I want to get into this whole, digital transformation, newer technology, well, does that application support all these new features and functionalities that I'm bringing out, right? That's something we have to look at, right? We talked about speed to market, reducing technical debt, right? Again, we don't have infinite amount of floor space, right? More customers want to do more with less, right? Being more green, but just having less stuff. That's all just technical. From financial standpoint, right? Again, where we're being told to do more with less. So we want to be able to predict where, what am I getting for the dollars that I'm spending, right?
And you make a really good point there. One, particularly around how COVID has impacted and had forced us to rethink how we implement, because previously cloud has been a growing trend for businesses, but there's still plenty of people that have on-premise servers or they have their own on-premise data center. And that was okay because everybody that was in the office was on the local area network, and that was fast enough to support everyone. But when you go from having 20% of your staff remote to having 80 or 90%, you suddenly realize, hey, I don't have enough throughput. I don't have a big enough pipe coming into my office so that everyone can access. And now we need to upgrade our firewall because we didn't set up the VPN protocols properly. So we need more licenses. And cloud can help you assuage a lot of that, can really help make that a lot easier decision and implementation process.
Yeah. And you know what? You've brought me to the next slide, right? So what is the answer that all the CIO directors and sometimes even the admins are saying? Well, we see all the commercials. Let's just put everything in the cloud, right? That's the promise. That's the answer, right? What are they promising? They're promising business agility. They're promising reduction in cost because I can just spin up and spin things down, and everything is easy, right? So everything is easy, right? So from an IT standpoint, right, the promise is that I can spin up applications as I need them. I can spin them down. I don't have to worry about having physical assets on the floor. From a business standpoint, right, because I can spin things up, spin things down, I'm not having to worry about purchasing and waiting for things to come. I can develop my applications faster, right? And again, that's key in this whole aspect. From an availability standpoint, right, if you think of some of the hyperscalers, they have multiple availability zones. So great, just click a button and you can replicate your stuff to another availability zone and business continuity is solved, right? Again, that is the promise. We talked about flexible and scaling. Your infrastructure is easy because I don't have to manage physical infrastructure, right? It's just a matter of going to a console and clicking some buttons, and now you get your environment. And the hope is, right, from a collaboration standpoint, because I can potentially just do all this in the cloud, that collaboration is happening in a much cleaner manner, right? I'm not having developers yelling at IT saying they're too slow. I'm not having IT telling my director that we don't have enough money to spin up these assets. So, that is the promise. And this is going to be the shortest podcast because, everything is done, right? You've gone to the cloud and all your problems are solved, right?
Good job. Thank you.
Right. Thanks. But obviously we know that that's really not the case all the time, right? So we'll take a hypothetical customer, right? They've gone to the cloud and 6 months later, they're starting to see some of the challenges, right? So what is the promise, right? I'm not going to go through it again. You kind of got it from the previous slide, right? What is the promise of the cloud, right? The whole ease of use. But in reality, right, what do we have? So you've got customers that have gone to the cloud. You do still have to have a contract saying, I'm going to consume X number of resources, right? So there is a possibility of unused resources, right? I spun up 50 VMs. I find out that I only needed 20. Well, you're still contractually obligated to, potentially have the other space just sitting there, right? You've got all these different assets, and we'll talk about, all the different services that the cloud brings you, but how am I going to monitor all of that, right? All of your stuff before was potentially in-house, potentially easier to monitor, but now everything is out in the cloud, and you might have to have a whole new tool set to monitor it. Security is a big one, right? And based on some of your previous podcasts, right, it's really important to have a good security model, right? You're in the shared world now. You're no longer dedicated into your own infrastructure, right?
And equally important, particularly for our folks out there who are following a compliance model, who has responsibility for what aspects of security?
Exactly.
Fall on you as the customer? Does that fall on the data center? Is it shared? Where is that responsibility shared?
Yep.
Because when you go through an audit, that is going to be one of the first things they looked at. They go, well, you didn't do A, B, and C. Oh, my data center said they were doing that. Did they? Is that in your T's and C's? Is that
you better find out.
Detailed?
Yeah, just look at the number of services that are out there. That's good, right? The fact that there are a lot of services from the hyperscaler is a good thing, right? I'm not saying it's bad, But determining which one to use, there's, professional services organizations that will come out there and actually talk to you about, here are all the services, here's what when you can use what, right? So it's not just, let me go to the cloud, right? The cost savings, yes, there potentially are cost savings, but you have to understand that it's a whole new billing process, right? It's not just a CapEx model, it's more of an OpEx model. So it's something that you have to have a different mindset on. Skill sets, right? Your admins are used to their network consoles, their server consoles, their storage consoles. They may have to learn a whole new skill set, right? So
that's another really important one is what are the rules of engagement, right?
Yeah.
What are admins capable of accessing, and what is the cloud provider supporting for you, and having clearly, just assuming that the provider is going to take care of everything will get you in a lot of trouble, make you very unhappy very quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. And, there's not just one provider out there, right? So the whole multi-cloud is becoming a reality. We're starting to hear more and more of our customers saying, I am adopting the cloud, but I like, Hyperscaler A's, facial recognition software. I like Hyperscaler B's database software, right? Keeping it high level. They're not just, going all in on one. So having this whole multi-cloud reality is important, but now it just, adds to some of the complexity of having to learn different, potential UIs, right? Determining when do I choose which one? And the big one, in my opinion, is data gravity, right? If I decide to go to Hyperscaler A and I find that, Hyperscaler B has the same service, but it's newer, maybe potentially better, easier to use. How do I move from one to the other? Right? Not easy. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So, that's all from a technical standpoint, right? We talked about some of the desired outcomes, but in reality, it's not just click a button and you're in the cloud. You still have to get the data out there, right? So there is a lift and shift process, right? If this is a legacy application, right, it may not be easy to refactor it and move it out to the cloud, right? You may say, oh, wait, let me think about data first and not everything, right? I may say, hey, my newer applications that are cloud native, maybe those go out there, but my legacy stuff, maybe I don't want to put that out there, right? So data protection, right? Again, in the past, if you are on-prem or have a private infrastructure, your data protection rules were pretty straightforward because you made them, right? You decided this is my primary site. This is where I'm replicating it to. I've tested it. Everything's good. Moving out to the cloud, again, you've got all these different services provided by everyone. How do you know which one's going to be best for you, right? So the big one, rogue deployments, right? This is one that we hear a lot about, right? Just because I have the ability of literally going to a hyperscaler and swiping a credit card. How do I know that my financial department isn't doing that already behind my back and has a bunch of data out there that I have no
didn't bother to tell you. Yeah.
Right. So
you brought up some very interesting and real points to think about around compliance and cybersecurity. We talked about CMMC in the last episode, that one of the big keys to CMMC is encryption at rest, encryption in transit. Well, if you're doing a lift and shift, it's not that easy, right? But if you're moving a massive amount of data, are you following compliance guidelines so that data is transitioned securely from the old data center to the new one?
Yeah. It's there's professional services that will do that, but that adds to the cost and time to market, right? Which again was one of the original promises. So once you're in the cloud, you may find that there's some new requirements that come out. So moving an application to the cloud, yeah, that's easy if I just move the data out there. But you may find, oh, wait, in order to make this production ready, I need to have a new networking application, a messaging, logging, another database, right? And you have to obviously pay for those applications, right? Going back to costs, right? You do have to monitor all this, right? So it's not just swipe credit card and start your applications. You do have to monitor your usage, or they could explode. And we'll get into an example of a customer that had this. We talked about new administration tasks. We talked about DR. So no need to go there. But the big one here at the bottom, the culture and mindset. It's not a bad thing, but it is a surprise to many customers, is that they need to get away from the concept of taking X amount of days, weeks to deploy an environment, then a couple other weeks to maybe set it up, optimize it, and then give it over to a developer, right? The whole mindset of cloud computing and how fast it goes really has changed the mindsets of a lot of our customers. And the other big truth is there may be an application that isn't ready to move to the cloud, right? Again, if you've got a legacy big database that is going to be so cost prohibitive to re-platform, or if you've got an application that you're going to retire in, let's say, a year, does it really make sense to go through all the effort of putting it out in the cloud just to go and deprecate it, right, in a year? So again, data is the key. So if we look at an example, so this was from a customer, right? This was the promise, right? I've got 100 VMs, and if I look at a catalog, it's going to cost me around $11,000 a month, which doesn't seem too bad. But if I want to make this compute and storage useful, well, I need an API gateway, right? Someone's got to be able to access it somehow. So there's a service for that. If I want to actually put this in production, well, I want premium support, right? So there's a cost to that. Do I want some object storage, right, for this application? Possibly. Monitoring, right? We talked about a little bit. So if you need to monitor this for, compliance, governance, auditing, like you mentioned before, for risk, right? There's a service for that, but that adds another cost. Do I need to make this application available to the internet? Well, sure. If you need that, you need a NAT gateway. We talked about some government auditing, right? There's different applications for that as well. A big one is snapshots, right? If I've got this application out here, I want to potentially protect it, or if I want to take snapshots and redeploy it for testing, you can do it, right? But there's another cost to that, right? Using the NAT gateway that we talked about before, a queuing service. So, this gets into the container discussion, but if you've got a bunch of microservices, well, how do those different microservices talk to each other, right? When a request comes into microservice A that has to communicate to B, you need something to manage that management, right? The queuing. So there's a queuing service. Do I have a database that's necessary for this application, right? There's another cost. Am I doing any sort of analytics on this? And I took away names, but if you look at any hyperscaler, they have different services for each of these, but I kept it pretty generic. How am I going to access my storage? Do I need a storage API service? Well, possibly. There's going to be another cost there. And then simple notification. So is my application something that has to go and reach out to an end user and notify them, right? Like you get alerts on your phone, right? That sort of service, right? That's going to be another cost. So this $11,000 a month cost that I initially thought, I was going to have, can quickly balloon into 2-3 times as much, right? When I add everything else on top of it. Now, again, this is not bad. It's not bad that, the public hyperscalers offer all of these applications. That's a good thing, right? But, people have to think, okay, do all of my applications need this level of, all these different layers, right? Or data first, is it my, tier 1 critical applications that need this level of availability or applications, and maybe some of my tier 2, tier 3 things, I don't need all of this, right? So that was, again, a mindset that people need to start thinking about when they decide which way they want to go. So story time for you. So these are just a couple or a few examples from customers that have reached out to me, and we just had general cloud discussions on their experiences. So this first one is a $60 billion global entity, right? They had their own internal cloud, right? And everything was working fine. Human resources came to the CTO of the company at the time, and they're like, hey, we've got this new HR application that we really want to try out. So they're like, the CTO's like, cool, we've got some free credits at this hyperscaler. Why don't you just go spin it up and try it out, right? Pretty straightforward and simple. So off they went, right? 6 months later, they don't hear anything. All of a sudden, the CTO gets a bill for $180,000. And he's like, well, what's this all about? So finds out that it was that HR application. And the CTO went to the director of HR and is like, hey, what's this all about? And HR director is like, well, we liked this application. It worked well. So we went and bought it. No one told this CTO at the time. And, as they put this application into production, again, a $60 billion global entity, you're going to have a lot of end users, a lot of employees. The amount of storage and compute began to grow and grow, right? And obviously that adds to cost. So the CTO is like, you know what, we have an on-prem environment where you can run this. You don't have to use the hyperscaler. So, they came back in-house, but to do that, they're actively using this application out in the cloud. So it took them 6 months to bring that data back, right, and bring it in-house from a hyperscaler, which you may know, right? You have to pay egress fees to do so. So this whole, let's use these free credits to try this out ended up being an 18-month, $1.2 million that they had, right? So, again, did this application really need to be in a public cloud, or could have they used this private cloud that they had before, right? So
you've hit on what might be the most significant thing that our audience can take away from this, because this is about cloud strategy.
Exactly.
And when you think about strategy, I'm putting my salesman hat on for a moment. When you make a business decision, there's 5.7 people involved, and I don't know how they came up with 5.7. If you Google it, that's the decision. 5.7 people involved in making a decision. And you ran through a list earlier. You have your CIO, you have your director of IT, you have your network admins. All of them need to be involved in strategically planning. Now, this example, okay, now we've added HR. So HR needs to be involved in strategically planning, because if we flip the script, if the CIO had gone to the chief human resources director and said, hey, we built this for you. She goes, what the heck is this? I don't need this. I didn't ask for this. So when we're talking about being strategic, we really are emphasizing, look, get your edge decision makers to give their input, because cloud may absolutely be the right answer, but it may be a colossal waste of money too. And it's important to figure that out before you start evaluating contracts and services.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're absolutely right. And, that comes to the next one. So it was a CIO of an insurance company, right? And they were using their cloud as a backup and archiving solution, right? It's a very typical use case that we're starting to see more and more of. So they've got their primary SQL database in-house, and it's being backed up in the cloud. So they had an instance where a database was corrupted. So it wasn't a huge outage or anything, right? It was a single table that they needed to restore, but they were having connectivity issues to the hyperscaler. And the hyperscalers, they're like, hey, we're working on it, right? You don't really have a single point of communication, right? You open up a ticket and you deal with whoever you deal with, and they're like, we're going to work on it, right? It took 3 days for them to restore this connection to this customer, right? So eventually they're like, you know what, we can't deal with this, right? It's the SLA discussion, right, with this customer. So they ended up bringing it on-prem. They did some sort of offsite replication, but they didn't think of data first when they made this decision, because what do the hyperscalers promise, right? So a question for you as we're going through this, if you are, if you've got an application that runs your entire business, right? Let's say that if that application were to go down, your whole business comes to a grinding halt, right? What is your main decision criteria when it comes to infrastructure, right? Availability, floor space, heating, cooling, cost. In your opinion, what would be the number one or number two decision criteria?
When I speak to customers about this, because this question comes up all the time, I look at them and I say, okay, what's your company's annual revenue? So let's now use that number and let's back it all the way down to your company's hourly rate.
Mhm.
How much revenue does your company bring in every hour? And then let's make up a number. Let's say it's $10,000. I'm just picking a number out of my hat. Okay, so we now know that every hour that you don't have access to that application not only costs you $10,000, it's also the salary of every employee. It is the rent or lease or mortgage for that space. It is the electrical bills. So you have to think of it from that perspective as well, that, oh, being down an hour is no big deal. It is, especially when you read the T's and C's to most SLAs. They're going to give you, if you're paying $1,000 a month for a data environment, that's really inexpensive, but just follow along for a second. They're going to credit you back that number by the number of hours that you were down. So if you're down 24 hours, hey, they're going to credit you back like $240. Wasn't that nice?
Yeah.
But that costs you, at $10,000 an hour, it costs you $240,000 plus, your people weren't productive. You had to pay them, and all the other infrastructure costs. So that's what you really have to look at and say, okay, well, this can't be down. This is worth investing more than we thought, because the fear of losing out on $10,000 an hour should scare you more than the cost of the infrastructure.
Yeah, no, exactly. So in summary, availability, right, is going to be your biggest factor in this. So if you look at some of the hyperscalers, right, I think all of them, 4 nines is what they are promising in their terms and conditions. So I've been doing this role for 16 years now in the pre-sales role, and if I walked into any of my enterprise shops and said, hey, I've got this new, and I work in storage primarily, if I got this new storage array and it promises 4 nines of availability, you'd kick me out, right? Everything now is 5, 6 nines plus minimum, right? Because again, everything is more digital. Things are happening fast. I can't be down for even minutes, let alone hours or days, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that you really have to think about. So yeah, I mean, they figured it out in the hyperscalers, right? You just throw your stuff in a different availability zone, right? You replicate it. Well, that's not free to do. You got to pay for twice the capacity.
Worth every penny.
Yeah. So again, data first, right? Understanding which data or what data is important and where it needs to go. And the last one, and this is a public one, nothing that's, that I dealt with personally, but I don't know if you've heard of code spaces. So this was a story a little while back. They basically housed a Git environment. So they had product managers that would handle different customers and their Git environment. Everything worked well, right? They had it for seven years. And their business was growing, but someone got access to their cloud control panel, right, where they provision, right? So they basically said, hey, give us money or I'm going to delete all your data. And this customer is like, oh, well, that's fine. I've got my backups and stuff replicated. But what they didn't realize was this same console, right? They did everything in the cloud. So that same console managed their backups, managed their replication.
So they had that ransomed as well.
Yeah. So they didn't end up paying. They tried to get control of this console themselves, and the hacker found out and he blew away all their data, and the company shut down overnight because they just lost all the data for every customer. So again, am I here to say that, cloud is the worst thing ever, or public cloud is the worst thing ever? No. But again, we have to think about the data. The public cloud has a ton of benefits, right? We've talked about all the different amazing services that are out there, right? Look at AWS, right? They've got this cool SageMaker application that customers are using for machine learning, right? Developers can take their data, deploy it, use this service to do machine learning models in the cloud, right? Azure has a new data governance piece of software, which, so does AWS, but again, they're different. So, you can choose which one you want, but these are pretty new, cool technologies, right? AWS also has a facial recognition software that's, again, similar to what Azure has. this is not something that you're going to be building in-house, right? So it's a very good use case for these public cloud hyperscalers is these services. But the challenge that we see is data gravity, right? There's a bunch of challenges that we kind of came over or we discussed before, but data gravity is the big one. So if I talk about this facial recognition software for a second, so if today I am a company, I'm like, hey, I really want to use that application. Great, I go to AWS, for example, and I start using their application. 6 months later, I find out, hey, Azure's recognition is kind of working a little bit better for what I want, right? So how do I move my stuff from AWS to Azure, right? One is lift and shift, right? Pay all that money, or have 2 copies of data, right? So now you got, this data explosion that we talked about earlier. So again, trying to find a way to use multiple hyperscalers at the same time is not a strategy that we see customers wanting to take advantage of or try to figure out how they do that. So again, we're trying to shift our mindset from this, let's put everything in the cloud, to let's figure out what data belongs in a public cloud, what belongs in a potential private cloud, right? So we basically do this by asking a handful of questions, right? What type of data is it? Is it a high transactional environment, or is it non-transactional? Where's your data created? Is it created in the cloud? Is it created in-house? How variable is this data? Who needs to have access to this data? Is it end users? Is it in-house folks? What is the data lifecycle? Is it something that's just going to be spun up for a handful of minutes and then gone away, or is it something that's going to persist, right? By answering some of these questions, you can probably decide, application by application, where you need to put what, right? So if we look at a data first strategy, what does that mean? So again, based on previous discussions, customers are looking to refactor their applications and make them more cloud friendly. So you have a decision to make, right? Do I repurchase that software? So, think of legacy Microsoft Office, right? Do I want to keep using that? Or do I just want to say, hey, I'm going to use software online, like a 365 model, right? And kind of take that headache off my shoulders. Do I want to rewrite that application? Well, if I repurchase, rewrite, replatform, right? Those are good examples of when someone would want to use a public cloud, right? If Kubernetes is exploding and containers are exploding, right? A lot of new applications are being developed straight on containers. Well, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they all have their own version of Kubernetes where people can, have a single look and feel type environment and develop in the public cloud. Not a big deal there, right? Development is a good use case. Things like, rehosting, that one you may need to, again, decide based on the application, is it worth moving to a public cloud or using, what you have today? Stuff that you're trying to retain or retire, there's no benefit to taking that, spending the time, money, moving it to a public cloud and using it there. For that, you're probably going to stick with, virtual environment, physical, what you're using today. But, what are customers demanding? So now we've got these 2 different mindsets, right? Of, do I want to throw everything in the cloud, or are you telling me to keep everything local, right? So what customers are demanding, and from what we see here, is they're seeing these issues, right? They're seeing the complex IT operations, everything I talked about before, right? You got all these different tools, things take too long, developers are demanding assets now, IT can't service it, everything's being done manual, and our cost is all being done with a CapEx model, right? So what they're asking us for is this, right? They want a consistent cloud experience. So it's not so much, do I choose public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud? It's, I don't really, I'll determine what the best model is, but I want the same experience regardless of where I choose, right? If I choose a private cloud, I want the same look and feel as if I chose a public cloud, right? The single web interface. Whether I am private or public, I want to have the same ability to scale on demand, right? So again, it's not this mindset of one or the other, right? It's, let me have everything. I'll choose where I want to go, but regardless of where I want to go, I want the same experience everywhere. right? That's what we're being told. So, imagine a world, right? And again, this is a perfect scenario where I can have flexible consumption, right? Where I pick my environment, whether I want fixed term, variable, right? However I want it. It's going to be completely OpEx, right? So I'm getting rid of the CapEx model. As you talked about before, who owns what, being able to define this is where the vendor will handle, like what will they handle and where's the customer's responsibility, right? Having those defined, but having it all done in a single console. So again, regardless of what type of cloud I use, the data is going to determine where you put that stuff, but you, regardless of where it is, will have the same experience everywhere. So, VCF, right, is a very good example. VMware Cloud Foundation, right? Customers are using that on-prem everywhere, but they're also using it across the hyperscalers that support it. What they love about it is, I don't know, or I don't care if my data is in-house or in the public cloud, right? Again, I will choose that based on the data and if it, where it belongs. But me as a admin, I'm going to have the same look and feel. I don't have to learn 3 different consoles, right? So that's the concept, and that's what everyone is asking for. So as you can see here, right, we're trying to go to everything as a service. Software, network, storage, compute, everyone wants everything as a service. So me being on the storage side of things, right, I'm going to talk about storage here, but if we had 6 hours, I could go into each one of these. But specifically on a storage standpoint, so again, having that cloud-like experience, think of your SLOs and SLAs, right? Regardless of who your vendor is from a storage standpoint, you're getting your 5, 6 nines of availability. But let me consume it as a storage. Let me pay for what I use. Give me that self-service portal, but let me have whatever leading industry technology is kind of a buzzword. And again, it doesn't have to be us, could be anyone. Give me that level of availability, but in a cloud-like consumption manner, right? So if we look at what we may do if we were smart is kind of have this sort of ordering model where you could go to a console, you could say, this is the type of compute I want. This is how many instances of it. This is my subscription, right? And then it gets ordered. This is something that would be shipped to your environment. So you have control, right? The security issues that we talked about, the DR stuff that we talked about, you still have control over that, but you're getting the feel of the public cloud in terms of ordering it.
I love what you brought to light here in the last few minutes, because cloud's not all or nothing.
Yeah.
Cloud truly should be optimization. The most important, as you said, the critical, and then start with why. Why do you want to put this in the cloud? Because it's not a bad idea, but it's not necessarily a good idea. So let's start with why. Let's get the other decision makers involved. Mm-hmm. To, hey, we're thinking about moving this to the cloud, and here's why. And then getting the input from the other departments on how it's going to impact them. I had a very interesting client like this about 5 years ago. I was selling them telephone equipment and the like at the time. And we had pitched them on a faster internet connection. And they said, no, we don't need faster internet. We're fine. I was like, well, we can do some nice things here without really blowing out your budget. So no, we're fine with the speed we have. And I said, okay, great. And then we did the installation. And a couple months after that, the owner of the company, the guys whose name is literally the company, calls me and is livid. It's not working. It's not doing what you said. Well, whoa, what's going on here? So we get, his IT guy and his office manager on the phone. And we said, I don't understand. The internet speed that we sold you is actually faster than the one you had before you came on board with us. Mm-hmm. So what's the problem here? So what we came to find out was they had shifted their billing platform from server-based to cloud-based and just didn't bother to bring that up during our exploration.
Of course.
And so now they're being choked, and I mean literally choked through a data circuit that was meant basically for web browsing and a little bit more than that.
Mhm.
So now 80% of their staff is accessing that real time Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you, man. It's a whole the proper decision process, right? And what we're finding is in the cloud world is, again, they just want this streamlined service. Everyone wants easy, right? Everyone wants easy, Mike. And unfortunately, it's not just a simple answer of, like I said, just shipped everything out there and all you go and off you go. You really have to find which solution, which strategy works best. Again, if we look at cloud, what strategy, public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, which works best? But again, give me the same look and feel. So no matter what decision I make, I'm not going to have this huge learning curve, right? Of I have to learn technology X if I want to do hybrid. I have to learn technology Y if I want to do public, right? Billing should be the same. So same concept here, right? If in a public cloud billing process, you pay for what you use. You've got your base capacity, and if you go beyond that, of course, right, you pay X dollars more. But give me that same concept locally, right? So if I tell vendor X, hey, I'm going to consume 50 terabytes, and you get billed 50 terabytes a month, right? Let me go beyond that without having to go through a 6-month ordering cycle, right?
Yeah.
Give me that cloud-like experience. So that's, again, that same concept is being deployed locally, right? This is all something that customers are wanting to do locally versus just, again, lift and shift everything. Because again, as we talked about before, there are many use cases where I want to keep my applications in-house, right? So that's just billing. If I look at it from an admin standpoint, give me the ability to have specific types of role-based access, right? Where I have a, storage administrator that can do everything, right? And I may have someone that can just view things. I may have a vAdmin that can, again, just look at my VMware aspect of it, but he or she cannot touch the storage side of things. Again, same experience that you would get in a public cloud, but now locally within your environment. As you mentioned before, Mike, right? Where is that line of management? Right. So that is something that has to be clearly defined if you want this cloud-like experience.
And is often overlooked.
Yes. So, if I get this brand new shiny storage array sitting in my facility, that part has been done through this cloud portal. But now that it's here, who's going to actually cable it? And then who handles, the provisioning and data protection? Right. So those, as part of this hybrid cloud strategy, that has to be clearly defined. Right. Generally speaking, right, a vendor will handle, having it physically put in, cabled, powered, everything. And then the end user will typically handle things like zoning, host mapping, data protection, right? That's your delineation. Now, yes, is this more potential work than it would be in a public cloud where you can just click buttons and off you go? It is, right? But now you've got the benefit of having the same look and feel of console and elastic scaling, but in your own data center, right? That's really something you want to think about. So I touched on some of the cloud apps, right? Again, there's 200 in each one of these, so we can't go through all of them, but there is a huge benefit to those applications. So another strategy that we're starting to hear from customers and something to think about is, I want to use these cloud applications, but I don't want to have vendor lock-in. So how do I get the benefit of both, right? So one thing you may not know is there are different services out there where you could use your on-prem environment. Again, regardless of who your storage vendor is, you can use those technologies, replicate it to these different managed service providers. So, Faction here is an example, but a service provider where they just piggyback on a bunch of different hyperscalers. So, your hyperscaler might be based in Santa Clara, for example, right? Let's say that all three, we can use Reston as a real example. So all these providers have data centers in Reston, Virginia, right? So here comes Faction. They're like, oh, cool, you guys are in Reston. I'm going to go build up a data center that's a couple blocks away from all of you. right? And that's really cool. So what can I do here? Well, now I can take my on-prem data, I can replicate it to that same class of storage in one of these types of data centers. And these companies are basically setting up direct links to these hyperscalers. So super low latency, high bandwidth links. And that really changes the game quite a bit, because now I can use this single copy of data that's sitting in one of these data centers, and via NFS, iSCSI, I can go and just simply do remote mounts to any one of these cloud providers. So just think of all the things that you could do here. So running an application in a cloud, right? That becomes pretty easy. So let's say I've got, doing this in reverse, for example, if I've got my application sitting in AWS, right, and I've got my storage sitting in one of these co-located facilities, I can use my on-prem environment as my DR site, right? That's a totally different strategy than what anyone thinks about, right? Usually it's the other way around. But here I can take that copy, I can bring it back in-house for DR. I can do it for analytics, whatever you want to use it for. But that's a very unique use case. So yeah,
but one that should probably be considered. Again, when you're developing your cloud strategy, that's the idea, is none of this is linear. Mm-hmm. It really, what are the edge cases? What are the what ifs? And, how many what ifs do we expect to happen in the next 12 months? Because we know some of them are. And then how do we compensate for the what ifs happening? We talking once a month, we're going to have a what if. We talking once a week. We talking once every 6 months. And a little bit of that is educated guessing. But when it comes to building a cloud environment, you really want to get granular and ask a lot of unusual questions. Yeah. Because that's going to build the best solution for your business. And that's the key here, is building it for your business.
Your business, and specifically, again, not to keep hitting on the point, but your data, right? This is going to be a specific application where I have this use case. Am I going to do this sort of thing for my development environment? No, right? That's probably going to be a whole separate environment. But, being able to do this is very, very unique, right? Another use case, we talked about backup a little bit, right? So what if I have my on-prem backup, but I want to replicate that backup to another site, right? But again, I don't want to be locked in to a specific vendor. So here, if I were to replicate to a service provider here that's co-located, in the event of a disaster, I've got a lot of options, right? If I have a disaster, I can simply say, hey, let me take this copy of data and mount it up to hyperscaler A. If I'm having network connectivity issues, like I talked about in my real world example, well, fine, I can go and restore it to hyperscaler B, right? That really changes the game quite a bit. Talking about the use case of ransomware, right? You can have a situation like this where you take your backup appliance and you've got one person, right? One person in your company that can have the credentials to open and close air gaps, right? Mm-hmm. So he or she can say, hey, 5 p.m., I'm going to open this air gap from my on-prem to this co-located data center, and I'm going to back my stuff up there, right? Everything that's running in the cloud today, well, I need to back up that stuff too. So every, maybe 6 p.m., they're going to open up that air gap and back it up locally. If I have a virtual backup appliance sitting out in the cloud and I want a backup of that backup, right? Again, this admin can come in and he or she has the keys to close that air gap. Once that backup is done, open that air gap. So in the event that you have this ransomware issue, like I talked about, fine, they can go and delete.
Unfortunately, it's not if, it's when nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. It's when. We hear about new stories, it seems like every week. If this situation occurs, great. They took down my primary source of data. Well, because of this air gap, I've got these backups and they're secure, right? So that's a pretty big use case. One that I see a lot is load balancing, right? Customers are trying to get out of the data the data housing game, right? And that was a use case, right? That's a pretty big strategy for the cloud, is I don't want to have to manage these different data centers. I'm just going to use everything in the cloud. So load balancing, right? If I've got an application where I'm starting to get more demand for this application, well, I can kind of do a burst out, right? So I've got this data sitting out there in the cloud. I can mount it to, AWS, expand this application, and now I can have, users hitting that application over there. So that's a pretty big one as well.
Yeah,
So
well,
kind of
Mr. Patel, you have done a brilliant job today laying out some content for us to think through. I know we are just about to wrap up the end of our time.
Okay.
If you had a parting thought that you wanted to share, exceptionally grateful for your time today and your brilliance. When we say subject matter experts, boy, Dell really does hit it on the mark. You guys have been great.
Yeah, no worries. And I mean, this is a real world genome project that I wanted to touch on for a couple of seconds, where they've got this data sitting in one of these co-located data centers. They've mounted it to Azure, AWS, and GCP all at the same time using compute, 7 petaflops, supercomputer. And basically they're doing human genomes, which costs $1 million 10 years ago, and now it's a lot cheaper. But here, a single data set being accessed by servers across multiple clouds. Right, this is not something that anyone's ever thought about doing. So this is a really cool strategy. But
talk about innovation.
These things is great. So again, in the end, what I wanted to discuss is, don't just think about everything needs to be lifted and shifted to the cloud. That's not always the right answer, right? You really need to look at all of your data and determine application by application, department, like you mentioned before, right? Have that conversation with the whole team and figure out what needs to go in the public cloud, what can be in a hybrid cloud, but give me the same look and feel regardless of which route I decide to go. So with that, Mike, thanks for having me. And
absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.